In modern culture, wealth is often evaluated in quarterly earnings, visible lifestyle, and individual achievement. In Jewish thought, wealth is evaluated in continuity. The real test is not how much one accumulates in a lifetime, but how much remains stable, functional, and productive in the hands of grandchildren. This is the Jewish principle that builds generational wealth. It is not mystical. It is not motivational. It is structural, and it is embedded quietly within Scripture. 1. The verse that redefines success. The idea appears with striking clarity in Proverbs, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children." The statement is short. There is no elaboration, no dramatic framing, simply a definition. A good man, not a brilliant man, not a wealthy man, not a powerful man. A good man leaves something durable enough to reach the third generation. The moral standard is not personal achievement. It is transmission. This verse reframes success. It moves the horizon beyond immediate heirs and places responsibility on the long arc of time. The text assumes intention. An inheritance does not appear by accident. It is constructed. The implication is clear. Wealth that ends with one generation is incomplete. 2. The generational worldview. To understand why this verse carries such weight, we must step into the biblical worldview. In Deuteronomy, commandments and promises are repeatedly described as applying to you and your children after you. Blessings and consequences extend beyond the individual. The covenant operates across generations. This framing changes behavior. And if a person sees himself as an endpoint, short-term thinking dominates. If he sees himself as a link in a chain, decisions lengthen. Immediate gratification loses urgency. Preservation gains significance. The Jewish principle of generational wealth begins here. You inherit, you strengthen, you transmit. The chain must not break. 3. Stewardship rather than ownership. Jewish thought consistently presents wealth as entrusted rather than absolute. The land ultimately belongs to God. Human beings act as stewards. This theological perspective produces economic consequences. Ownership without higher accountability invites indulgence. Stewardship encourages restraint. A steward plans for succession. He understands that what he holds is temporary and therefore must be prepared for transfer. This mindset tempers reckless risk-taking. It encourages documentation. It prioritizes preparation of heirs. Generational wealth depends less on dramatic gains and more on careful continuity. Stewardship fosters continuity. 4. Structure before sentiment. Wealth rarely disappears because families lack income. It disappears because they lack structure. Jewish legal tradition devoted substantial attention to inheritance laws. Property rights were clarified. Responsibilities were defined. Transitions were regulated. The purpose was not rigidity. It was preservation. Ambiguity destroys wealth. Disputes fracture families. Litigation consumes assets. Emotional conflict erodes trust. Clear structure prevents erosion. In Jewish tradition, writing a will is not morbid. It is responsible. Communicating intentions is not distrustful. It is stabilizing. Generational wealth requires architecture before affection. 5. The discipline of allocation. To leave wealth for grandchildren, one must restrain present appetite. This is not asceticism. It is allocation. Ancient agricultural law repeatedly distinguished between what may be consumed immediately and what must be preserved. Seed was not food. It represented the future. The metaphor extends naturally to capital. A portion must be separated for reinvestment. A portion must be protected. When allocation happens first, Before lifestyle expansion, surplus accumulates. When allocation waits until after consumption, little remains. Jewish practice embedded structured giving and structured saving into life rhythms. This prevented total absorption of income into comfort. The result was slow, steady accumulation. A generational wealth is rarely dramatic. It is consistent. 6. Education as primary capital. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of Jewish generational wealth is the priority placed on education. In Deuteronomy, parents are commanded to teach their children daily. Learning is not delegated entirely to institutions. It is embedded in home life. Literacy became widespread in Jewish communities centuries before it became common elsewhere. Study was not luxury, it was obligation. This emphasis created portable wealth. When families lost land, they retained knowledge. When political systems shifted, education allowed adaptation. When economic restrictions arose, intellectual capital opened alternative paths. Material wealth can be confiscated. Human capital travels. A family that leaves money without competence leaves fragility. A family that leaves competence can regenerate money. The Jewish principle invests heavily in the latter. 7. Community as economic protection. Jewish wealth historically functioned within communal networks. Charity funds, interest-free loan societies, educational institutions, and communal courts created internal stability. These structures reduced catastrophic collapse. When one family faltered, assistance prevented total ruin. Generational wealth requires insulation from irreversible failure. Community provided that insulation. This model differs from hyper-individualistic wealth accumulation. It emphasizes embedded prosperity. Wealth strengthens community, and community strengthens wealth. The system is quieter. It is also more durable. 8. Modesty as risk management. Jewish ethical literature frequently praises modest living. This is often interpreted purely as moral humility. It is also economic prudence. Visible excess invites pressure. It escalates lifestyle expectations. It transforms surplus into obligation. Obligation limits flexibility. Flexibility preserves capital. Families that align spending tightly with peak income become vulnerable during downturns. Families that live modestly relative to earnings create buffers. Buffers protect continuity. Generational wealth is sustained not by conspicuous display, but by disciplined moderation. 9. The three-generation challenge. Economic observers often note that wealth dissipates within 3 generations. The first builds, the second maintains, the third consumes. And the verse in Proverbs confronts this pattern directly. It defines goodness as defeating it. A good man leaves inheritance to grandchildren. The challenge is explicit. Wealth must outlast the creator. Jewish tradition addresses this not only by preserving assets, but by shaping heirs. Children are taught responsibility early. Inheritance is framed as trust, not entitlement. Wealth carries obligation. Obligation creates caution. Caution preserves assets. X. Time, discipline, and rhythm. Jewish life is structured by time. Weekly Sabbath, annual festivals, multi-year cycles. These rhythms cultivate patience. Wealth accumulation requires patience. Impulse spending erodes capital. Structured time reduces impulsivity. The weekly cessation from work reinforces limits. And it reminds individuals that life is not purely production and consumption. This interruption creates perspective. Perspective influences financial behavior. Generational wealth thrives in environments where time is respected and planned. 11. Law over mood. A defining feature of Jewish financial practice is its reliance on obligation rather than emotion. Charitable giving is not dependent on inspiration. It is structured. Contracts are detailed. Inheritance procedures are clarified. Emotion fluctuates. Law stabilizes. When financial habits depend on mood, consistency fails. When they depend on obligation, repetition emerges. Repetition compounds. Generational wealth requires habits that function regardless of emotional state. 12. The human capital. Before luxury, Jewish households historically invested heavily in education even when material comfort was limited. Books were prioritized. Study time was protected. This allocation signaled values. It communicated that knowledge outranked display. Children raised in such environments internalized hierarchy. Skill before luxury. Skill generates income. Luxury consumes it. By preserving this order, families sustained upward mobility across generations. 13. Embedded identity. A powerful psychological component underlies the Jewish principle. Children are taught that they belong to a chain stretching backward and forward. They carry legacy. When identity includes lineage, behavior adjusts. Risk-taking becomes measured. Reputation matters. Decisions consider long-term impact. This does not eliminate error, but it reduces recklessness. Generational wealth depends more on minimizing destructive mistakes than maximizing spectacular gains. The cultural emphasis on lineage quietly supports this restraint. 14. Misunderstanding the model. Observers sometimes attribute Jewish generational wealth to secrecy or exclusivity. Historical evidence suggests otherwise. The practices are visible: education, documentation, modesty, community reinforcement, structured giving, disciplined saving. None are mysterious. All require consistency. The principle is often overlooked because it lacks drama. It does not promise rapid transformation. It promises stability. Stability rarely attracts attention, yet it determines endurance. 15. A pattern. Across centuries, history provides repeated illustrations. From medieval Europe to the Ottoman Empire, from Eastern Europe to North America, Jewish communities rebuilt after displacement. They carried learning. They carried networks. They carried habits of disciplined allocation. Material loss did not equate to permanent poverty because structure remained intact. Structure regenerates wealth. Without structure, wealth evaporates. 16. The calm conclusion. The Jewish principle that builds generational wealth is neither secret nor sensational. It is a disciplined orientation toward time and responsibility. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. The verse sets a standard of continuity. To meet that standard requires stewardship over indulgence, education over display, documentation over assumption, community over isolation, patience over impulse. And it requires viewing wealth not as a personal climax, but as a bridge. A bridge connects what came before to what will come after. When families internalize this identity, financial decisions align naturally with preservation. Consumption becomes measured. Investment becomes prioritized. Heirs are prepared. The principle is quiet. It does not demand applause. Yet across centuries, it has produced something rare. Families whose stability survived exile, whose knowledge endured upheaval, whose prosperity extended beyond a single lifetime. Not because they chased dramatic accumulation, because they guarded transmission. And in that calm, disciplined commitment to continuity lies the Jewish principle that builds generational wealth.